Okay, we'll get started. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so I'll keep my introduction short. Thank you for joining this webinar, our 8th webinar. If you don't know about OSH is Oman's startup hub. It is now 1 year old, and we've been growing steadily for the past year, and it's a community to learn, discover, and connect with the Omani entrepreneurial ecosystem. There are 149 startups on the OSH platform, 37 supporters, and 38 advisors. So if you're not already on the platform, do sign up, take some time to explore it and really connect with startups and supporters in Oman. Today, on our 8th webinar, we are discussing fintechs in Oman and the FinTech opportunity in general. We have a very exciting panel, so I'll let them all introduce themselves and enjoy. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is a pleasure and honor to be here, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be with an esteemed panel that we have here today. Thanks to them, and thank you to the viewers who are currently watching this webinar. The webinar will also be recorded, so you may view it at a later time. My name is Ali Abdulhussain. I represent IDO Investments. IDO is the venture capital arm of OI, or Oman Sovereign Wealth Fund. It specializes in conducting growth stage startups globally, as well as doing local investments. In the local investments landscape, we've done investments in eMotion, Garzati, Innovatech, and as well as in part of our ERP or part of our COVID program that we had last year, investments in Afkarios, as well as in Akid. IDO's position as strategic investors, as investing in startups globally to solve challenges locally. If you're aware of an Omani challenge that can be solved by investments in a global stage startup, growth stage startups globally, do reach out to IDO Investments. Now to the topic for today, FinTech. I cannot tell you how I recall not too long ago the challenge of walking around without cash. But recently, in the past 2 years, now I can go a week without requiring cash. I can make payments with my cards. I can make payments on my phone. FinTech has really in Oman, has really tremendously been adopted in many different ways. And I'm glad to have a panel here that's really representing a unique symbiotic relationship of the FinTech community ecosystem here in Oman. So starting off with Saleh Tamami from Mamun. Saleh Tamami is a serial entrepreneur and co-founder and CEO of Mamun, an Omani FinTech in embedding financial products and services to digital payments or ecosystems. Founded in 2020 and has partnered with several financial institutions in Oman and digital platforms. Saleh, please.
Thanks Ali for the intro. Super happy to be here. Real pleasure and honor to be alongside with Abdul Wahid and Ghada. Thanks for the opportunity. It's just a bit about Mamun and what Mamun is about. More and more users of digital platforms or people who use ERP systems, food ordering apps, marketplaces, the more our lives transform or go digital, the more time we spend there and the more value is exchanged in those ecosystems. So what Mamun does is it bridges the gap between financial products or features or services with the people who use these digital platforms. So a great example, and something that's become more and more ubiquitous nowadays is payments. So when you order your food through your favorite food delivery apps such as Tamdan, you would pay for the food order within the app. You do not have to pay in cash, or you don't have to go to another app to pay. So that's a great example of what embedded finance is. But there's just so much more to it. If you think about the types of digital platform users out there, they fall under several categories. So they could either be users, direct customers. They could also be merchants who are selling services through these platforms. They could even be employees, such as using an HR platform within their company. All of these types of users have certain financial products and services needs that is related to that digital platform that they use. So Mamun orchestrates the end-to-end journey for these end users to access financial products through the digital platforms that they use. So Mamun does this, again, step to step. First, scoring and originating the customer's information that they may have within those digital platforms, packaging all of that, and then sending it to multiple financial institutions who would be interested to offer a product or a service. We were founded in 2020 during a relatively tough time for digital platforms or industries at large, but we feel really good about where we've come so far in terms of introducing something that is relatively abstract, but we see huge potential of. And one thing is to note that Mamun doesn't seek to replace original or existing financial products, but complements them and links those products to people who would end up using them.
Thank you so much, Saleh. That's amazing. So, okay, embedded finance sounds like the thing that Mamun is presenting, producing. Is there another example of embedded finance besides payments for delivery apps, or just another example, just so we can let it sink in?
So think of the food delivery app example again. There are hundreds of restaurants who sell through this digital platform. Again, them as restaurants, as businesses, they also have certain financial products or needs. A good example of this would be a sort of working capital loan. And this loan could be tied to their sales that they generate through this platform. When Mamun comes in, we expose this data, of course, with the consent of the user, and help them leverage this data for them to go and acquire a financial product relevant to their needs in that digital platform. So if a restaurant, let's say, makes 500 to 1,000 riyals a month in sales, and this sales is documented and is transparent information hosted within the food delivery app, then this gives the financial institution a certain level of trust with that information. And we could also get to do very interesting things, like we could get to foresee what would the sales be like for that restaurant 3 months, 6 months down the line. And again, this gives an indication to any financial institution to offer them a certain product they may need. So that's on the lending side, right? Yet FinTech covers so much more than just payments and lending. There are opportunities to, for example, investment-related products. An interesting one, recently we just partnered with, I think, Oman and the region's first construction platform, a SaaS provider called eBina. A great founder, shout out to him. And what they do is they help customers end-to-end build and design their house or house project. And they get quotations from contractors, etc. So that's a housing loan example, but there's more to it. There could be housing insurance related products there that could be sold as well. So the world FinTech is by and far large, covers every type of financial products and services you could think of. The question is just a matter of making it easier for both the end users and the financial institutions to offer these products through digital means.
I definitely agree. The FinTech landscape is very wide and there's many aspects. Hopefully we can cover a sample of it and really identify what are the opportunities for Oman. Thank you, Saleh. Going over to my next esteemed panelist, Abdul Wahid Al Murshidi. Just a quick intro. Abdul Wahid Al Murshidi is the Chief Islamic Banking Officer at Sohar International with over 18 years of professional experience across different functions of the banking sector, including audit, finance, investment, and Islamic banking, both in Oman as well as the Middle East region. Abdul Wahid holds an executive MBA from LBS, or London Business School, and a Bachelor of Science from Sudan Public University. Abdul Wahid, please introduce yourself and introduce Sohar Islamic. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you, Ali. I would like to thank all the participants also, and thank you to Ghada and Sarah and Saleh for being with us on this. Mainly, I would like first to introduce the banks. The banks are the first FinTech, frankly, because the word FinTech is the financial technology. And the banks maybe 30, 40 years ago was mainly on papers. And right now, with the development of technology, they were the first financial institution using the technology and develop with them. the main purpose of the fintech mainly is the customer experience, because with a good customer experience, you can have more customer, more profit, and less operations. And that's continued with the time. However, we noticed that the bank at least noticed that in the last 5 to 10 years that there is so many organizations with the smaller players, with lower investment, which could provide so many solutions, which can provide a good service to the customers in all sectors, as Saleh said, in the investment, in lending, in insurance. Fortunately, some of them are in Oman and they are doing well. We believe the banks will continue to be a fintech. However, they have to cooperate with all of those players, benefit from their experience or from their technology, and add their experience or the banking experience to their new technology or a new solution. So together they can provide an excellent solution to the customers overall in all sectors of the financial services.
Abdul Wahid, thank you so much for the introduction. Absolutely, I do agree. I mean, the banks are the first fintech adopters. I mean, I recall mobile apps being introduced to Oman, and now I can do so much functionality with it. Before, I had to go to an ATM or ITM or even to the branch itself. In regards to, as you mentioned, working with others that have new technology solutions, can you give some examples, maybe if there's no names required, but of how does a financial institution generally work with a technology provider?
Sure, I think Saleh also gave some solutions, and mainly you have in the banking industry or the financial services industry, you have either the depositors or the borrowers. So how can we make the life of the depositor easy? How can we provide them an easy solution for their payment, for their investment if they want to invest on that? I can give an example in the Robo Advisory or investment worldwide. An application, and that's mainly in the Islamic investment, an application called Wahid. And there you don't need to have your own advisor to invest. All what you need to do is to put your profile, and the system itself with artificial intelligence will suggest the best area or the best investment profile or portfolio which you can put your money based on. And that saves a lot of work, time, and effort for everybody, and allow the small investor and small depositor themselves to invest in a good asset without the requirement to a dedicated financial advisor or financial analyst. There is certain application in Oman like Bima, which is insurance technology, and I think that's provide a unique customer experience to everybody. All the insurance company, they are selling insurance, but how can you make the process of insuring your car happen in 5 minutes while you are sitting in your seat or in your office, in your home? At the same time, the banks should play the role of the borrower, of the lender itself for their customer who will borrow money. And in order to take a credit decision, you need to have a lot of data. And how can you gather all of those data? Not only your internal data, which is the data warehouse, however, how can you measure the customer behavior through different channels, as Saleh said, maybe through the sales, if they want to borrow, even through their social media. How can I know their behavior through their social media? Analyzing certain information through artificial intelligence, and that could be outsourced from outside or done inside. For example, what car you drive, I mean, that will explain if you are an aggressive person, conservative person. All of those criteria will help the bank to take a credit decision, to lend you as individual or to lend you as a corporate or SME, and make the process faster, and that will make a better customer experience and help everybody.
That is great. One of the major takeaways I took from that is customer experience, and all the products and services you're providing is to ensure the better customer experience and enjoyment with the products. Thank you so much, Abdul Wahid. final but not least, another last esteemed panelist, Ghada Al Kharusi. Ghada represents the Cvs Fintech Committee in her role as Deputy Chairman. She comes with over 10 years experience with the Oman's regulator, having worked in various capacities such as banking development, anti-money laundering, and combating financing terrorism. Ghada also heads the FinTech regulatory sandbox at CBO. Ghada, welcome to the panel. We look forward to hear a lot about the FinTech regulatory sandbox by CBO. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for the introduction. I would first like to thank OSH for having such a great initiative, namely for the ecosystem by the ecosystem. It will really be a good platform for the startups, entrepreneurs, investors, and now regulators to connect. And it's really very unfortunate that we cannot hold such meetings face-to-face. But in all cases, I hope everybody is staying safe and well. Now, to answer your question or to introduce a FinTech committee, I would first like to talk about or define FinTech. FinTech is broadly seen as a way to lower cost, improve customer experience, and expand client base through the use of technology in areas such as payment, trade finance, corporate lending, or even by offering ancillary service solutions. Now, those FinTech tides were coming in really fast and in several forms, mostly accelerated by the pandemic. Worldwide, we have seen mass adoption of digital and mobile payment channels and an increase in the use of technology such as distributed ledger technology like blockchain, or even the use of cloud computing, big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Now, one of the aspired goals at the central bank is to encourage sort of the concept of innovate to include. And by that, I mean encouraging innovative products, services, solutions to include the unbanked and underbanked into the financial ecosystem, possibly through offering new delivery channels. And of course, it should be in parallel with central bank's objectives of maintaining financial stability, financial integrity, and customer protection objectives. Now, to reach this goal, the Central Bank of Oman has put together a FinTech ecosystem to enable and support such FinTechs, startups, SMEs, financial institutions, and technology firms to develop those innovative solutions that will eventually contribute and give back to the country, either through economic growth, creating new jobs, or attracting venture capital investments to the country. To this end, and to achieve the said objectives, the central bank has constituted a FinTech committee to keep up with the rapid advancements. Now, the FinTech committee, we came up with a FinTech framework and roadmap. It's a 3-year plan with a number of strategic initiatives that paves the way for Oman's FinTech ecosystem. And it is in line with Oman Vision 2040. It compromises of 4 beams, which are mainly policies, infrastructure, talent, and demand. I will talk briefly about the 4 beams now. For the policies beam, we are working on introducing agile regulation and providing policies in areas like cloud computing, for example, and open banking API strategy. Basically, we are trying to take the approach that facilitates innovation while mitigating the risks. The second beam is the infrastructure, where the central bank is working on providing the necessary infrastructure for the adoption of the new technologies and for those fintechs to grow in. For example, by having a 24/7 real-time electronic payment system. We're also working on our national electronic Know Your Customer platform to identify and verify customers and aid in the digital onboarding process. We're also working on enablers for experimentation purposes through the introduction of the FinTech Regulatory Sandbox. Now, by issuing policies and working on the infrastructure, this by default will create demand and new opportunities for the different sectors and local stakeholders such as telecom companies, cloud service providers, and that would as a result attract international talents into the Omani market and also capitalize on the local talents. If I can give some statistics, in Oman we are fortunate to have a young tech-savvy population. If you look at the Oman population by age distribution, we find that more than 47% of Oman population are youth. Moreover, the mobile penetration ratio is high in Oman, which is about 131%. And the mobile broadband access is 104% per inhabitant, which all considered opportunities for the Omani fintech market. Looking at the current situation, the pandemic has also created a lot of opportunities. It has driven digital transformation in many banks, just as Abdul Wahid has mentioned, and it has changed the market, the consumers, and people's behavior. On the other hand, because we are talking about an ecosystem here, and to have that healthy ecosystem, it's very important to collaborate and get the needed support from all the relevant stakeholders in Oman, like telecom companies that would contribute, for example, by providing adequate network coverage. And in terms of education, we aim to work with relevant universities to meet demand and requirements of the market by offering more specialized programs and degrees. This is just a quick overview of what we are doing in this space and how we are approaching fintech in the central bank.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. I really like the title, Innovate to Include You, and include the underbanked and underbanked. That was very important for any growing developing country. In regards to the one of the main launches for late 2020 was the regulatory sandbox. Could you go into a little more detail about that so we can?
Yes, sure. So just to give you like sort of a brief history, the sandbox is just a fancy word for the test and learn environment, and it is not a new concept. The sandbox concept has emerged in 2007 after the global financial crisis. Now, the FinTech Regulatory Sandbox is one of the initiatives of the FinTech Committee at the Central Bank. It was launched in early December 2020 when the Central Bank has announced the opening of its first cohort with the theme of payment solutions. So what is a FinTech Regulatory Sandbox? It's a framework set up by the regulator that allows FinTech startups and other innovators to conduct some sort of a live experimentation on their proposed services in a controlled environment under the central bank supervision. It is a virtual space in which applicants can test their almost ready solutions in a live manner. This means with actual volunteer customers for a limited time period, usually 6 months, under a very defined parameters of the central bank. The sandbox is made in a way that is cohort-based or theme-based, and we decide on the cohort based on the needs and the demands of the Omani market, and after conducting thorough research. Now, who's eligible to apply? The sandbox is open for licensed financial institutions, such as banks, money exchange companies, finance leasing companies, and non-bank financial institutions like fintech companies and startups, both local and international. And the proposed fintech idea must be of an activity that is covered by the central bank's mandate, such as banking activities and payment solutions. I can take you through the fintech regulatory sandbox process, and the process falls under 4 stages in general. So the first phase is the application. So it goes through application, then evaluation, then testing, and then the exit plan. For the application phase, the sandbox framework, its eligibility criteria, objective, and all the relevant details are published on the central bank's website under the fintech page. The applicant should meet the eligibility criteria and submit the application to an email that is referred to there, sandbox@cbo.gov.om. After that, the sandbox team will do a thorough run on whether the idea is innovative in nature and whether it's presenting any added value to the customer in terms of lowering costs, for example, with a clear business case, and whether it is compatible with the banking and payment infrastructure, and if it's ready to be deployed in the Omani market. We will also look into the relevant safeguards that must be put in place with regards to complying with anti-money laundering and combating financing of terrorism requirements, and having proper customer consent in place and meeting the security requirements. Now, when all those requirements are met, we can give other regulatory exemptions for the purpose of testing. Then only the applicant will start the live testing cycle for a period of 6 months. The safeguards here is the maximum number of clients that should be included in the testing phase and the amount and volume of the transactions. Now, some applicants, to be able to test their solution, would require some sort of integration with the central bank's payment systems. In such cases, the applicant should specify the type of system he is willing to integrate with and comply with the given rules and security standards before commencing into live testing phase. And finally is the exit phase, where the applicant is presented with 3 scenarios. The first is that he would require an extension for the period of testing, or the second is the applicant has failed and would require to exit, or the applicant would succeed and the Sandbox team would refer the applicant to obtain a license to the concerned department. So this is just a brief of how and a run through of how the Sandbox works.
That was great. I think we'll circle back to the Sandbox afterwards. Is there everything that you mentioned? Is there a place somewhere where somebody can find it or download those steps? I would imagine the CVO ones. Where can they find our audience can find that information in the public domain?
Yes, so it's posted on the CBO's website under the FinTech page, and we have a set of frequently asked questions, the FinTech framework, FinTech Regulatory Sandbox Framework, and the application form. It's all on the website, Central Bank's website.
Perfect. And second of all, congratulations on the brand new branding and logo for CBO. You haven't seen it, it's on the CBO social media platforms. It looks fantastic. Definitely loving the logo. Thank you, Ghada. We'll circle back to this regulatory Sandbox later on. Okay, now what I really want to get to, we have a panel that are representing a great relationship, right? We have a startup that does in a fintech, we have a finance institution that's represented by Abdul Wahid, and we have the regulatory ecosystem. So I would like to start the discussion on the relationship between and how the three of you interact with each other. Saleh, if you can really just start it off and mention when you had this embedded finance idea, you wanted to start doing something in Oman. How did you start? Who did you reach out to first? Where did you go to get information? Please.
Great question. So part of it is you're inspired by actual problems and driven by real world opportunities, right? Regardless of the technology, it's all about the customer or the end user. So if that problem emerges, it's very clear to you how you would go about it. We were inspired at Mamun when we had an engagement with one of the telecom operators in Oman. And we were serving as techno-commercial managers for a service provider, a vendor that was working with the telecom operator. And that, to us, was the first sort of insight into embedded finance. Here you had an example of an organization that was not a financial company, didn't know where to start or where to end in terms of launching a financial product. But because of its user base, because of its ecosystem that it had, it was totally ripe to do that. Yet we also noticed that it was very hard to go about it for both the telecom operator and for the vendor. So we did this for 3.5 years, and we learned a lot in terms of what does it take to launch a financial product if you're not a financial product related company, right? If your core business is selling minutes or data bundles, how do you shift to start selling a financial feature? So that's, to us, was the aha or idea moment that inspired us to look more into embedded finance. And then the more you look around you, the more you realize certain aspects of finance is already embedded in digital platforms or in other ecosystems. For us, reaching out to financial institutions was to gain 2 things. One, we sort of know what it takes infrastructure-wise to make embedded finance happen. So one of the first things we wanted to know is what is the level of digital transformation in the financial institutions around us? And we came to realize that some are much more advanced in that respect, having APIs, digitally transforming their infrastructure, making them ready to integrate with third parties and to create new solutions. Whereas, unfortunately, there are others who are still a bit behind the curve. So that, to us, was interesting in terms of dictating how we approach financial institutions. Mamun is designed to integrate regardless of where you are in your digital transformation journey. So it was very interesting for us to see where financial institutions stand in Oman, at least. And then when it comes to the regulators, there's often this misconception that regulators are, the bad person, they're out to get you, they just want to, burden you with regulation and rules, but that's not the case, right? I think it has to be said, when you're doing fintech, there's a lot of very sensitive customer data that you're dealing with. And secondly, you're dealing with currency. And currency is extremely, extremely sensitive, right? So the last thing the regulator wants is someone to just come, install, and just launch a service that has implications in the thousands or in the millions of riyals. So they get a bad rap, regulators. But I'm here to say, as a testament, you should be very happy to have a strong regulator and someone that actually cares, let alone a regulator that wants to engage with startups, that wants to, that realizes that the world is moving forward and in several directions, and wants to nurture that. And again, for the benefit of the customer or the end user or the citizen or the resident. So that's sort of key to mention. It's often undersaid. So we're very happy with how CBO is sort of looking at this space.
Okay, and have you interacted with the FinTech Committee or with Sohar International by partnership, or the Sandbox? Have you applied for it? I just want to get your
right. So you're looking at a live example of a startup that is applying at the FinTech Regulatory Sandbox. I'll emphasize that the experience has been extremely positive. They really know what they're doing, but they're also very supportive, right? And that's important. So that's ongoing. We're smack in the middle of that, of the initial application stage. And with Sohar, we are in partnership discussions, specifically with some embedded finance use cases. To us, we initially thought that partnering with banks, certain banks would, apart from the technology side, we also wanted to know the culture behind banks and their thinking in terms of where this industry is going, how their industry is changing. So again, you have some on the end of the spectrum who are complete deniers, who will think, fintechs are just here out to get us. We're a bank, we can do this much better than them, etc. But then you have others who are extremely positive and forward thinking, such as Sohar International, Sohar Islamic, who realize that no, the road to actually deal with this is through partnership, and to open ourselves culturally to working with fintech startups such as Mamun.
Thank you for that. Abdul Wahid, in regards to, you've mentioned this before in regards to partnership with startups and how that works. I kind of Saleh got to a question that I think was really interesting to double click on: culture within banks and the culture of doing things internally and partnering. When was the eureka moment that you were able to get to explain to your colleagues at work that partnering with startups is something of the future? Was there, was it customer centric? Was it financial returns? Just kind of curious, where was that eureka moment, and if you have a story to tell about that.
I think, Ali, as I mentioned before, this didn't start right now. I think this started maybe 40 or 50 years ago, when the banks start using the BCs. So they bought their first BC, and before that, the bank used to have their manual books. So that shift by using the BCs, by using the ATMs, and that's development, that's considered as using third party as a developer for the core banking system, for the ATM system, for the data warehouse system. All of those services are developing very fast right now. So 30 or 25 years ago, we don't have Google, or it used to be very small, but right now it grew very fast from very, what's called a search engine to a service provider in all aspects of life. And that's what I think the banks realized that long time ago. But right now, we need to ensure that we don't work only with the what's called the core banking providers, company like T24, etc. We don't work only with the service provider in the ATM solution, for example, or the card solution, or companies like MasterCard and Visa. We cannot do everything by ourselves, but we can cooperate with the best provider, the most agile provider, and dynamic provider. And that could be company like Visa, or could be company like Mamun, or could be any other company. The technology market overall depends a lot of merger and acquisitions. So the big companies, sometimes they will acquire a smaller company because they will see an opportunity. And I'm speaking about different sector. Banking, financial services is not far away from that. And I believe the banks slowly will ensure that they are buying the best technology and they are providing the best channel or service provider in order to serve their customer better.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Also, let's just discuss about banking and Islamic banking in regards to fintech. Should, as an entrepreneur, maybe the fintech solution, approach, maybe let's say the fintech solution, when I come to a financial institution, should I treat it differently with Islamic banking? Islamic banking is growing and being adopted more customers around the world. Should it be treated differently, or is it quite similar? Can I get your concept on that?
See, the Islamic banking is a bank. However, it is transaction as per the Sharia. So that's the main. It depends on the mindset of the bank itself and how to do business. Technology is totally separate from that. So whoever will provide a good service or a good solution, either to a conventional bank or an Islamic bank, it depends on the strategy of the bank itself, how welcome or how open-minded they are, or agile they are to adopt those technology, either an Islamic or conventional. The Islamic banks, again, it is mainly to provide us similar services. However, it should comply with the Sharia.
That makes sense. Perfect. Thank you. A question for everybody, just moving on to the next. We just discussed about the relationship between our three panelists. Now I just want to get a general overview of what is the next fintech stage for adoption for Oman. As Saleh mentioned earlier, and the rest of the panelists also mentioned, there's a lot of elements regarding to fintech, not only payments, but it could be in wealth management, such as Abdul Wahid mentioned, insurance, and other mortgage real estate. What could be the next phases of fintech adoption we can see in this country? Should I start off with Saleh's mic is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Sure. So payments still, as ubiquitous as it is, it's at the forefront in terms of, number of financial institutions, number of fintech startups that are getting into it. And I think it will only take about 5 to 10 or maybe 15 years for it to be, khalas, the norm, what is expected, right? Cash will become eventually obsolete. So that still has some ways to go for it. I think, and this sort of mirrors Mamun's mission, for us, we see the act of embedding financial products into existing ecosystems as the next frontier for fintech. We know and realize that more and more people are living their lives digitally, right? Whether it's for work or play. So I think the next frontier in fintech is to connect better the providers of capital or financial products and those end users. I don't see, there's obviously more pace and, some products are faster than others, but I see there's a huge disconnect in terms of financial institutions and where are hard to reach end users, banked or underbanked alike.
Thank you, Saleh. Abdul Wahid, Ghada, would you like to build on that, on the next stages of fintech in Oman, the opportunity?
Maybe Ali, if I can add to that, I mean, I'm looking at it from a regulator's perspective. So all those fintech subsectors, as we call, what we do is that we look at the whole picture and then we sort of reflect it into the fintech strategy, into strategic initiatives. And our main focus as a regulator is to sort of build the enabling provisions, the legal and the regulatory frameworks for those fintechs to work and grow. So this is how we look at it from a central bank's perspective.
Perfect.
I'll just add, I think what Ghada and Saleh said cover most of the point. But I would like to add that mainly in the fintech, we need to start where the others end. So we can look what is the development the worldwide and how can we adopt it in the local community or the local companies to help the local customers and to comply with the local regulation.
Fantastic. So Oman we're adopting fintech in 4 different ways. From a regulator's point of view, from financials, from startups, is there a country that we benchmark ourselves into, or a region of the adoption rate, or where we aspire to be in 2, 3 years, 5 years from now?
I may sort of start to address that. Definitely, I think the world is a much smaller place. But Abdul Wahid mentioned an interesting point, which is localization, right? So a product that may be relevant in China or a fintech solution that may be relevant in China may not necessarily be relevant in Oman or in the Arab world. But I think as time has passed by, these past 5-10 years, and because the financial services industry is relatively similar in so many regions, I think there are certain factors that influence, which region gets from which other region as a benchmark. Oman, certainly, I would say the benchmark or sort of comparative that we could look in terms of localization would be the GCC countries, North Africa, perhaps, wider Middle East region. But again, us from a startup perspective, you cannot just be siloed within the country or within the region that you're working in. You have to look much, much more broadly to see where works and why it works there. If there's a localization element to it, then so be it. But we're starting to see that more and more fintech, just like financial services, just like banks, just like how we have banks everywhere in the world, selling products and services or other financial services and products is more or less the same around the region. Definitely elements like, what is the mobile penetration rate? What is the youth segment, demographics? All of this also influences.
Can I add to what Saleh has just said?
Of course, please.
So I believe each market, I totally agree with what Saleh has said. So each market has its own demand and different priorities and needs. So it all depends and goes back to each country's fintech strategy. The way we have drafted our strategy was based on the market analysis and needs. We took into consideration some facts such as the market size, infrastructure readiness, and the laws and regulations. So the answer to this question is quite debatable, but I can say that we are members in the GCC FinTech Working Group, and it's a collaborative effort in terms of sharing of knowledge and putting in place initiatives that would serve reliable and handy for fintechs across the GCC.
Ali, if you allow me, maybe there is a comparison. Right now, if you compare the fintech solution or the transaction solutions between countries, you will find a better solution in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda than the one provided even in Japan and Europe. And that's very strange, frankly, to see, but maybe because the needs there is more, because with huge quantity or volume of cash, you can buy smaller items. So they were pushed to use the technology and fintech to do their transaction, which is not the case in maybe Japan or Europe. So I think we need to find our own local theme, which make the local experience for the customer easy and more developed. If we will not do that fast and we didn't adopt, we will find companies from outside and smaller player or bigger player could provide those fintech solution, transaction solution, even without license. And the problem is, how can you force them to have the license if you can trade on the net or can provide some other solution in certain area like the investment, insurance, brokerage. So therefore, I think there is huge need to create our own financial solution, mainly to ensure that whatever fintech solution is regulated, is protected, so you can protect your customers, your citizens, and the economy overall.
Fantastic. Is there who are your examples of your favorite fintechs that you witnessed in your travels or research online that would be nice to have here in Oman? So for instance, I mean, it could be smart contracts, things, crazy things that I've read about smart contracts, or the ability to monitor where assets are coming from, blockchain or whatnot. But what are different fintech solutions we've seen around the world that will be interesting to see in Oman? Saleh, I'm going to start with you, even though it may not be embedded finance.
No, that's fine. So Abdul Wahid sort of touched on this. So sort of M-Pesa is a huge one. It's sort of like the godfather of modern day fintech.
Yes.
And again, it's very interesting to see how they focused on a need, right? People in Kenya, live vast distances from each other. So, it's not feasible for a bank to have branches everywhere, right? But everyone has a mobile phone. So it's very interesting how that country and how industry and the private sector in that country pushed or helped to push the fintech agenda forward. It's wrong to assume, whether rightly so or not, that you must always rely on the regulator to set certain trends. Sometimes the private sector will also push their own agenda because they've identified a specific need, right? So I think that's interesting. One that comes to mind is a digital neobank in Georgia. So right now from Oman, I can open up a bank account within 5 minutes with them. To me, that's very interesting. They don't require you to be a resident there, but they use that so that it helps push investments in Georgia, right? And residency plans, etc. Another one I think that's very interesting is, and this is something because I'm sort of going through the pain points right now, is this relatively new emerging area, which is, as you mentioned, Ali, similar to smart contracts, but related to trade financing. So issuing LCs, amending LCs. There's very few players who are acting in this space, but right now I'm very interested in that simply because it's a problem I am literally facing as we speak. I'll give the floor to Abdul Wahid and Ghada if they'd like to add.
I think, Saleh, you covered most of the things. So nothing from my side.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about M-Pesa as well, and as you rightly said, there's local demand in Africa, and everyone uses mobile payments, not even the smartphones, but regular, the older generation phones to make payments, and it met their local challenges. So fintech. So we have 10 more minutes, and I want to ask one more question, then I'll go to the Q&A from the audience. So fintech is still a young ecosystem. Talent may have not been, so in regards to human resources, have been put into fintech. Is there ways where we can attract talent, maybe from oil and gas sector or from the banking sector, to move to and become entrepreneurs like Saleh, what would be the drivers or encouraging things to encourage them to come over and be innovative? Abdul Wahid, maybe from your ecosystem, you've seen a lot of talented individuals in the banking sector that maybe could go to the other side and become startups. What potentially holding them back?
I think the competition. So when everybody, either the bank or the local investors, will find such a supply chain solution coming from outside, and that can help the banks, the customer, sorry, to have adequate fund with some solution from outside. That competition will push everybody to go to that sector or to accelerate localizing those opportunity in order to provide working capital solution for those corporate, either in oil and gas or in any sector, through fintech. However, we need to be careful also. All of those solutions are not risk-free. There are certain bad stories happen recently. For example, there is companies like Green Cell, which was failed, and it is in the supply chain sector. However, there are other competitors who are doing well. So we need to be careful while working with those companies or when we are introducing such solution, because most of those solutions will depend on the artificial technology or on the machine thinking, and that could be manipulated by some of the borrowers and companies. So from the banks also, we need to be very careful from that side and regulator.
Thank you so much. And Saleh, in recruiting, so this is a pain point that I've heard from a lot of startups, recruiting talent to work in their startups. What kind of challenges have you had to introduce into the fintech sector?
So I think one of the challenges is within us as recruiters, right? Regardless of where you work, regardless of where you are, you always have a mixed bag of, those great superstars who can come on board your company, and those who aren't necessarily yet there. So I think step one from a recruiter's perspective, you have to keep an open mind, and you have to have a very a supportive, nurturing, learning environment within your startup, and advertise that and show that off to prospective employees. Definitely, I think something as startups we could definitely learn from the West or from Silicon Valley is to give some equity to especially key employee hires, so that acts as another motivator. A lot of companies aren't willing to do that, and I think startups should and have to do that. I think another one is when you're surveying the market and you're trying to really look for talent. Yes, one of the challenges is people are very comfortable with their full-time job. There's a job security element. There's definitely that risk element of joining a young startup, uncertainty, etc. So that's a bit of a challenge. But apart from that, you need to look hard. And if you don't find, and if you haven't motivated them to join you, or you didn't create a culture to nurture and teach them while they're on the job, then yeah, you'll have much bigger problems.
Perfect, Saleh. Thank you so much. In the last few minutes we have, I would encourage my panelists to look at the Q&A section and see if there's any questions that you would like to answer. There's one that I would like to ask. Open banking. Open banking was introduced in the UK. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think 2019 or 2018, there was an API law that came out. And from my understanding, that encouraged a new wave of fintech. How does you and your perspectives from the three of you about regarding open banking is relevance to Oman? Is it a priority? Is it not? Would like to, Ghada, would you like to?
Yeah,
Perfect.
I'd like to take this first. So I feel like with the increased use of digital services and the rapid advancement in technology, traditional banks worldwide are evolving into this open banking culture and open banking API concept. So just to sort of come with it, just to define what open banking is, it allows the financial institutions to share the financial data with each other, typically through third-party providers. Now, from the central bank's perspective, we are working on an open banking API strategy for the sector. And the open banking API will play a major role in the development of financial and banking services, including real-time payments, great financial transparency options for the account holders, as well as the marketing and the cross-selling opportunities. So we are studying the market and we are coming up with a strategy to see how best this open banking concept would fit into the Omani market.
Thank you so much, Ghada. Saleh, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, and maybe Abdul Wahid could also add to this. A lot of financial institutions have looked at this space and have decided perhaps our market size and our market dynamics may not necessarily be worth it, right? You know, relatively small population, very sort of traditional industries. But I completely disagree with that kind of thinking. And this is mostly based on the business model in which some of these financial institutions want to offer open banking or APIs or connectivity to their own financial institution. A lot of the financial institutions, unfortunately, look at it as an opportunity, you know, apart from enhancing customer experience, but also to, make the client or customer more sticky to them, and hence more revenues, which is a totally fine argument. But you need companies to come in between to complement such an open banking structure or open banking ecosystem. So it's one thing to have APIs. It's a completely different subject and conversation to encourage people to use those APIs. A lot of financial institutions, as I said, are disheartened by that demand side of the equation. But again, where we come from as Mamun, we see it definitely as a helpful sort of pipeline to have in any ecosystem, in any market. Open banking, APIs, easier to connect, etc. But that shouldn't necessarily be the limiting factor, right? A lot of markets looked at open banking and sort of set that as their main agenda. And then with that, many innovations came up, many startups, etc. But if you're trying to crack a solvable problem, go out there, don't wait for open banking. But I think eventually, it will come. And I'm glad to hear from Ghada that they're looking into this.
Thank you so much, Saleh. I'm just looking at the time. I can't believe already an hour passed. There's much more we could talk about. So I'm just going to quickly summarize it and hand it off to Sarah. First of all, thank you so much to the panelists today. Saleh Tamami from Mamun, Abdul Wahid Al Murshidi from Sohar Islamic, and Ghada Al Kharusi from the Cvs Fintech Committee. Today we discussed about embedded finance, how Mamun was able to discover a challenge and work its way to really position itself and work with financial institutions and can now be an applicant to the Sandbox. We also learned that from the bank's financial institutions been doing fintech for 40 to 50 years ever since introducing computers, and the focus of it is customer centric, and that's the important part for financial institutions. From the Cvs Fintech Committee, the financial regulatory sandbox, it's there, it's live. Do apply for it. Even if you're currently not doing payments, please apply for it. It allows Ghada and her team and the committee to understand the demand from the entrepreneur's point of view on what could be implemented here. Again, it's the Cvs Fintech Committee can only do as much as they know what's required in the ecosystem. We also discussed about localization. There are good things and not great things about it. Not everything may be applicable to Oman, but there are things that can be applicable, as Saleh mentioned, regarding discussing into open banking. Some financial institutions looked into the size of the market and had different opinions about it. But again, there are things that are applicable to the country and there are things that are not applicable. And open banking, as we learned from today, the Cvs Fintech Committee is looking into open banking and looking at other things as well to use the country for the benefit of people as well as the benefit for the nations. Once again, thank you so much to the panelists and thank you to the viewers. Saleh, pass it over to you to close. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone that attended. And there were a lot of questions that we couldn't get through. Please do reach out to the panelists, reach out to us as well if there's anything you feel that wasn't answered, and we will try and send that to you by email. This webinar was recorded and it will be posted on YouTube tomorrow. And there will be a summary of the session in both English and Arabic that will be available on the OSH website next week. And I'll be sending an email anyway with all those details. There's quite a few questions, Saleh, on Mamun and what it does. So I hope that whoever missed the beginning introduction can check out the YouTube video and watch that introduction again. For everyone else, thank you. And do connect with us. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and of course the website. And look out for upcoming webinars, newsletters, and other events that we will be hosting. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا.
Shukran. Thank you all panelists as well.